Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. I'm Randy Wright, and I'll be your captain on this solo flight special edition of our state-of-the-art radio program. Folks, this will be the final boarding call, so if you please, claim your seats, fasten your seat belts, kick back, relax, and enjoy the show while I go ahead and delve into the pre-flight checklist, as there really is a lot of news and information to get to before I may fully indulge you with your in-flight entertainment. Well, folks, here we are. It is well past the point of Election Day, and we see that the ramifications of having selected the New York billionaire, businessman, real estate tycoon, and all-around vulgarian Donald J. Trump as our nominee is beginning to be felt. We see that he has come forth and basically proclaimed that he was going to end the corruption, that culture of corruption in Washington, D.C., and essentially drain the swamp. But the problem is, we see that key positions in this burgeoning Trump regime have been handed to basically the cronies, the ones that have been peddling corruption in the entire edifice of government for several successive generations. And that's the problem. It shows us that he is not honest about the things that he proclaimed, and he's already started walking back a plethora of promises that he made while out on the campaign trail. And of course, that's not the end of it, folks. This is going to continue. It's going to get worse with each passing day. And we are going to discuss it a little bit further in a later show this evening. But what I want to touch upon now is this whole idea of his going forth and just speciously, facetiously proclaiming that we're going to drain the swamp with my smally hands. I'm going to plug it. But here's the deal. If that is what we're going to do with Washington, D.C., if that's literally how we're going to go about governing, wouldn't it be wise to not select people like Rinse and Repeatus to be the chief of staff for the White House? Wouldn't it be intelligent or showing good faith on the part of the president-elect to not place Stephen K. Bannon, who is a self-avowed Leninist, in a position of mainstay authority within the Trump White House? One would think so, but that's not the way that Trump operates. Trump is just going to continue to operate in the way that he's always done, business as usual. And as my first officer, Jeremy Grapington, and I have oft-times reiterated on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, his way of dealing with business and going forth and trying to tackle problems is one that's rather seedy. He is not one that has a reputation of being a forthright and honest businessman. And to my mind, that plays havoc on what we're trying to accomplish here. You see, what had irritated the American people, the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours, was the fact that it seemed as though the upper echelons of power, that those political powers that be, were disregarding their own desires, hopes, and concerns. One of the major areas, of course, where this is the torrent or just this wave of illegal aliens that have been pouring across our porous southern border without any check. And in fact, we've discussed how Barack Hussein Obama utilized the executive power in a way that is not constitutionally enumerated unto the office of president via Article 2, so that he was essentially creating a second legislature. And we've already known that Donald Trump is going to continue this pattern and process because he has stated so by his own fruition on the campaign trail. Again, it shows us that it's eclectic. It shows us that there is a lot of disorganization. There is a lot of disunity. There is a lot of what he says that simply isn't so. And that places us in a precarious position. The other aspect of it is we see that surrogates for the Trump train, such as former Speaker of the House and unfaithful husband Newt Gingrich, also continue their tirade against the Never Trump movement. You see, it is all an attack on morality. It is all an attack on those of us who actually find value in the supreme law of the land, which, pursuant to Article 6, Clause 2, is none other than our shared United States Constitution. That is just something we cannot get around. They are attacking us with as much venom and viciousness as the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftist. And that raises that question of why. Why is it that people like Newt Gingrich, who is a big government establishment type or detente member of the gutless opposition party or GOP, so vociferously and viciously and savagely and barbarically attacking the Never Trump movement? Did they not get what they wanted? Did they not achieve the victory that they so desired over Hillary Rotten Clinton? And don't get me wrong, we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, are ecstatic that Hillary lost. It's just that we don't believe that Donald Trump represents the best interests of the United States of America, and we also have significant lingering concerns that he will not govern within the confines of the Constitution. You see, one of the most brilliant things about that Constitution, which is the greatest social contract or compact ever devised by the hands of men, yet divinely inspired by providence above, is that it limits the government. That's the entire purpose. We, as the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in the United States, are a party to this contract, and the government is the other party. And when it acts in a rogue, tyrannical, and ultimately illegitimate fashion, we can hold them accountable for breach of contract. In fact, we see that that is the case in the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the United States Constitution. When you look at the First Amendment, everybody knows freedom of speech. Everybody knows freedom of religion and the free exercise thereof. But it also provides the people with the right to petition their government for a redress of grievances. That is a quintessential aspect of our shared Constitution and indeed the entire American system of polity. Without that, we are left with nothing. And that is by design. It is by design that we, the people, are the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this federalist, constitutionally endowed representative republic of ours. And of course, one of the things that we've seen over the weekend is all of these protests that have been going forth and saying we need to get rid of the Electoral College. No, we don't. The Electoral College was put into place because we are not a direct democracy. I know that that is something that a lot of people struggle with. It's because of the failings of the historical revisionists that infiltrate and infest our institutions of education from coast to coast and border to border. It's this misnomenclature that is used all the time in proclaiming that the United States of America is a democracy. We here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, have decried that time and time again on numerous previous episodes. And the reason being is that we are not a direct democracy. The problem with a direct democracy is it only recognizes the sovereign authority of a majority, whereas in a federalist, representative republic like that which our government has been since the inception of our nation some 235 plus years ago, recognizes the rights of all individual popular sovereigns. You see, that's the amazing thing. Never before in the course of human events had a nation been established in which it was the people that were the true sovereigns. Sovereignty has its origins in ancient times. The sovereign originally was considered either an individual or a select group of individuals. It was Greece, particularly Athens, that had a direct democracy. And the problem with it was that the people would have to vote on every issue, and one vote could overturn it, and it could paralyze the government. It could also come to erroneous conclusions. One of the most famous stories from the history of philosophy is the story of Socrates, when he was placed on trial for allegedly corrupting the youth of Athens. And one of the things they said was he had denied the existence of the gods. Now, this was something that Socrates denied, and of course he really didn't, but they had decided by a majority vote that he should die. And so they gave him poison hemlock and made him poison himself. That is one of those ongoing dangers of a so-called direct democracy. It could be more aptly referred to as mobocracy or mob rule, because it can, in times of chaos and in times of great complex legislative issues, boil down or break down into a mob-like mentality. And that was something that our founding fathers strove to avoid, because it did not represent the type of system that they wanted to create. They had looked back at the annals of history and just had decided that those ancient systems, like the ancient Greek polis system — in fact, polis is where we get the word politic from — just they didn't represent the will of the people. And that a true, honest, and fair, free system had to be controlled by the people. That was the Enlightenment era thinking. That was the natural law tenets, which are immutable, meaning that they are just as applicable today as they were at the inception of our country some 235 years ago, as God willing they will be some 235 years from today. But this sort of thing is not discussed. And because it is not discussed, the American people lose sight of just how significant and important that is, as well as our role. And so they don't understand the contract that exists with us, and so they begin to look for strongmen, men who claim, or women, if Hillary had won, who claim that they have all the solutions, that they can act in singular fashion, when in fact nothing could be further from the truth. But we know that the American people are fed up with the detached state of political affairs in the United States. We know that the people felt as though they were being ignored, and they're right to feel that way. If we think back to the midterm elections of 2014, they had vowed to overturn Obamacare. They had vowed to end the executive amnesty, and they didn't do it. They just didn't do it. And so that ratcheted up the tensions, that made the body politique of these United States of America irate and full of rage and fury. And Donald J. Trump is the direct consequence therefrom. Donald J. Trump represents that. But they said that they liked him because he was going to clean up the corruption, that he was a straight shooter, that he shot from the hip, that he spoke truthfully and clearly and just called things the way that they were, and that's why they felt they could trust him. But for those of us who have been digging into the history of the mafioso quafioso for over a year now, we see that more than anything, the man is consistently inconsistent. He has been a frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftist or progressive for the vast majority of his 70-year life. There's no way around that. And we see that that is coming once again to the forefront, that is who he is, what he stands for, and what he represents. This comes from the Politistic. The Politistic says that President-elect Trump fills two key administration posts, and this is by Matthew K. Burke, and it was published on November 13th. And he said that basically Trump had announced on Sunday that he has named one political outsider and one political insider to fill two positions in his regime. I was the one that added the word regime, but already we see that what Trump is trying to do here is to play out one of the parts from his book, The Art of the Squeal. I mean, The Art of the Deal, or whatever the hell it's called, in which he claims to be the great negotiator, the man who will take a very hardline position in the beginning and then work his way back. So we could take all of the campaign promises that he made throughout the election and show that those were the hardline positions. He's now going to whittle it back, and piece by piece, issue by issue, and promise by promise, he is going to betray the American people. But above all, he's going to betray the most ardent acolytes of the Lion Branch Trumpidians who continue to congregate in their Trumpidian tabernacle. Because they're going to come forth. And they're going to say, that's not what you said. That's not why we chose to vote for you. We've already seen it from people like Bob Bennett with respect to his backpedaling on full repeal of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, or as it's known in the common vernacular, Obamacare. You see, none of it matters. None of it matters to Trump. Trump is going to operate the way that he wants to. He has that totalitarian streak within him. He is an autocrat in that form and fashion, and that ultimately does not translate well to a free, open, and honest republic like that which we have here in the United States. And this is what we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, have been trying to warn you, our cherished listening passengers and audience members, about for well over a year. So we see that these problems are real and they are persisting. But we see with respect to Rince and Repeatus, who is the chairman of the RNC, or Republican National Committee, had been named as chief of staff, and former Breitbart News head Stephen K. Bannon, who had been the CEO of the Trump Dump campaign, will serve as chief strategist and senior counselor to the president. Why do I have all of these images of portly Henry VIII coming to mind and Cardinal Wolsey as his chief counselor and advisor coming to mind? Well, it's because there is a wily aspect to Stephen K. Bannon. Stephen K. Bannon is a member, a dyed-in-the-wool member of the alleged alternative or alt-right. And he has some very radical views. And the fact that this is now beginning to go mainstay and become mainstream is something that we, who are constitutional compositionists, those of us who believe in restoring strict adherence to the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution at all levels of government, should be opposed to these people and should be exceedingly wary of them. We talked about how Edmund Kozak over there at Laura Inkampf, or Laura Ingram's LifeZet page, had said that those of us who adhere to the Constitution are mistaking it for perfection. No, we're not. The very aspect of the Constitution, the very outlook of it, the very language found in the preamble that essentially lays out the role, scope, and obligation of the Constitution as well as its application, says in order to form a more perfect. That qualifier, more, means it ain't perfect, but it means that we strive for it. And it's this striving for perfection that these alt-right and these cuck suckers, so to call them, to flip their term against them, don't like about it. It's what they loathe and despise about those of us who have not sold out our principles. And the reason for that is they realize they can't control us. Now they're demanding that we fall in line still for a tyranny of false unity. And they claim that we are hoping for President-elect Trump to fail. I'm not hoping for anyone to fail. What I am hoping for is to secure the blessings of liberty and to secure the domestic tranquility and to create a more perfect union. And I do not believe that we can necessarily achieve that under a Trump presidency. And therefore, I'm going to do what any and all Americans are actually called upon to do, and that is to hold them accountable. Think back to that whole thing, that whole notion of being able to petition our government for a redress of grievances. That is one of the key and quintessential and central aspects of our Constitution and thereby our republic. But they don't like the republic. We've discussed how the alt-right wants there to be this sort of tribalism with respect to national identity. There has been a push for nationalism, and yes, Trump has flirted with nationalism. And nationalism per se is not necessarily a bad thing, but it is when it gets tied into these rather antiquated notions of tribalism. The natural law is a philosophical outlook in which it says that the law can be universally understood by any human being by applying their mental faculties and capabilities and logic and reasoning. They can understand it. Thomas Aquinas had claimed that the natural law is inscribed upon the hearts of men, meaning, irrespective of who we are, God's law, or the law of nature, or however you would like to refer to it, is universally applicable. And whenever the laws of men contradict the natural law, the laws of men are the ones that are not binding. That is powerful. That is a powerful attribute that is a true characteristic that remains a central, paramount pillar of our system of polity. But you wouldn't know it. You wouldn't know it looking at the several successive election cycles we've had and the last two terms of Barack Hussein Obama. You wouldn't even recognize it from the presidency of George W. Bush because they have not been adhering to that. It's a dangerous proposition that we find facing this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours. It is one of those things that refuses to go away. And it won't go away. It won't go away because it is a quintessential aspect of who we are as a nation and as a people. And so to see that Stephen K. Bannon, who proclaimed to one of his close friends, and the Daily Beast had put out a piece with respect to this, that he was a self-avowed Marxist or Leninist, actually, and wanted to destroy the conservative movement and the constitutional movement of these United States of America. That should be sounding the alarm bells and sending up red flags for decent, hardworking, red-blooded American citizens throughout this nation, because it tells us beyond a shadow of a doubt that there is now a deliberate, well-orchestrated, plotted-out plan to try to strip and deprive us, the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people, of our fundamental and inalienable rights, which were endowed to us by our Creator, the God of nature himself. That's the problem. You see, the entire impetus behind what we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, are attempting to achieve is to empower you, our cherished listening passengers and audience members. We want you to be empowered. We want you to be free. We want you to be able to share in that great beauty that is our republic, in exercising your rights without fear of government redress or ramifications. That is what liberty is about. And again, when you think about what it is that the alt-right stands for and represents, and how they have based their ideology on these failed tactics and strategies of Europe from the 1930s and 40s, that is incompatible with the United States. I would go so far as to say it's as equally incompatible with the supreme law of the land, which, pursuant to Article 6, Clause 2, is the Constitution, just as much as Sharia law is. And that's the thing. What we vote for is not necessarily a candidate or an individual. What we vote for is the Constitution and an agent who would act in the best interest of the Constitution. And so the reason that the Never Trump group and movement even came into fruition was that we had come to the inexorable conclusion that neither one of the two mainstay candidates were going to do any good or serve beneficially towards the Constitution. Now, a lot of the Trumpidians have come forth and have attempted to assuage our fears by saying that, look, we'll be there to stand by your side and to basically rein him back if he does any of those things, which we don't think he'll do. Here's the problem. How can we trust you to do that when all throughout the election we showed you the demonstrable examples that are numerous and weighty that he would do exactly what he has started to do? If you couldn't recognize it then, how will you recognize it now? If you couldn't act upon it then, if you couldn't stay true to your principles then, why in the hell should we believe that you will be true to your principles now? Now, I'm not saying that to be harsh, and I'm not saying that to be argumentative. It is a legitimate question that rises to the surface when you consider the totality of the circumstances. There is nothing there which we can literally trust Trump to do with maintaining the Constitution. Because by his own admission, he's not once found any intrinsic or inherent value in it. And he is putting people up around him that don't give a damn about the Constitution. You know, rinse and repeatist doesn't care about the Constitution. We see that from the way that he conducted himself during the Republican National Convention held in Cleveland, Ohio back in July. And Stephen K. Bannon, a self-avowed Leninist, certainly does not care about the Constitution, and certainly as a chief strategist would not be pushing a constitutional strategy. He will be pushing an alternative or alt-right strategy, which by its very nature is diametrically opposed to our Constitution, and even more specifically, the natural law tenets that form the bedrock foundation of the entire edifice of government. And so it means our liberties are in jeopardy. It means that we are facing a real problem here, and the concerns that we have are real as well. And so if we want to address these problems, we have to be cognizant of not only the dangers that are out there, but of being able to identify them. And so again, with respect to the loudest acolytes of Trump, I can't just trust but verify. You have got to go out of your way to prove you mean it. And that means not simply dismissing all of these things that he has been doing, which has been walking back the promises that he used to bamboozle you. Sorry, that's just the facts. And that's all we deal with here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer. I find it very interesting that one of the things that Trump said that he's going to do is he's going to go forth and quote unquote drain the swamp and try and get rid of corruption. But I think literally what he's going to be doing instead is replacing that swamp with a slum where all of the sludge from the swamp will continue to be there. And he is just adding to the corruption that is running rampant in the nation's capital. You see, this is the thing. For everybody who said that Donald J. Trump was a political outsider, they were ignoring the fact that for the vast majority of his public career, he has been enabling the worst agent provocateurs of corruption, for lack of a better term, than anyone else. He's been the money bags man for them, for lack of a better term. And so we see that if he is the enabler of it, how can he go forth and proclaim that he's going to end corruption? That is just an intellectually disingenuous, frivolous nonsense that he's been throwing out. And of course, it reflects the same thing with respect to all of the promises he made. And one of the things that I recall that he said during the campaign trail was that anything that he said at that time shouldn't be taken as the gospel truth because they were mere suggestions, that he wasn't president yet. Well, he's not going to be able to do that when he assumes office in 2017. And it clearly demonstrates to me that this is a con game. It is a game of two-card Monty in which the American people are the marks, the suckers, the ones who are going to lose out each and every time, and that's been by design. I don't think Trump ever really thought he would get this far. And in fact, it's not just my word that you can take for that. The Washington Examiner has put out a piece by Kyle Feldscher in which it says that, report, Trump originally planned to drop out in October of 2015. And in this piece, he says that Trump believed he'd be done running for president by October of 2015 and had been planning to endorse New Jersey Governor Chris Christie. This is something that CNN reported this morning. Now, folks, there can be no shadow of a doubt, no doubt whatsoever, that Chris Christie is a member of the detente wing of the gutless opposition party, or GOP. He is anti-gun. He is establishment hack-type material. He is the worst elements of what we would not want from a Republican aside from Donald Trump. And there are similarities between the two men. They are both vulgarians. They are both crass. They are both corrupt. But again, we see that that did not come to the surface during the electoral process. That's thanks to, in no small part, to the rank and file of the graduates of Pavlov School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media that were running with their narrative and agenda, wanting to prop up the weakest GOP candidate to try and usher Hillary Clinton in. We can see that from how stories came to the surface from those WikiLeaks stories just days before the election, in which they had been asking the DNC for talking points to essentially do hit points and hit pieces on Ted Cruz and Donald Trump. And so it shows that this disingenuous aspect of the media has come to the surface. And we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, have been warning all the way back to our premiere episode, which aired on September 11th of 2015, that that is what these frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists do. It's that dangerous game of semantics. It's that way that they try and spin their propagandistic narrative and agenda to bamboozle the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people. And so this comes to the forefront. So with Trump thinking that he'd be out in October 2015, he really hadn't planned for any of this. It was just an ego trip for him. It was a way for him to try and market himself. And that is what he has always been. He is a marketing ad person. He is an image builder, so to speak. And so what he was hoping to accomplish was get his name even further recognized, and then he could launch the Trump Media Network. That's why he associated himself with the alt-right, and particularly with Stephen K. Bannon of Trump Bart News, who is now his chief strategist and counselor. And so that has come to fruition. But there's a new book about the 2016 presidential election in which the Washington Examiner discusses, in which a Christie advisor told reporters from the network that Trump's original plan was to drop out of the race in October of 2015. He had told Christie that he would give him his endorsement when he did withdraw from the race. Instead, Christie would become one of Trump's first major backers from the GOP's political class and ended up being one of the new president's top advisors until, of course, that Bridgegate scandal came back into the forefront. So we see that already, before Trump even sets foot in the White House, corruption continues to surround him. Corruption continues to be spread. And yet he is going to drain the swamp? No, he's just spreading the muck around, making the water murkier than it already was. And that is a betrayal of his loudest acolytes and supporters. Just like he's now starting to walk back his alleged immigration reform. None of this was a stalwart position. It was all showmanship. It's all political kabuki theater in the hopes that he could make money off of it. Because some 16 years ago, when Trump was considering making a run for president back then with Ross Perot's Reform Party, he said that he would be the only candidate in American history to actually make money off of running for the office of President of the United States. The man's past words, deeds, and actions fully dictates who he is, what he believes in, and what he is hoping to accomplish and achieve, and there is no way around that. And so, again, that is part of the reason why this Never Trump movement did arise, and it's why it won't go away. Despite the fact that people like Newt Gingrich think we are going to go into the ash bin of history, Newt is just as mistaken about that as he was being honorable to his wife. But we see, again, that according to the report, Trump and Christie were both working against Florida Senator Marco Rubio during the Republican primary. Rubio wound up being ripped mercilessly by Christie for repeating a talking point during a debate and had engaged in some memorable back and forth with Trump, most notably discussing the size of Trump's smally hands. This is why Christie and Trump went after him, to try and cement the legacy of either Christie looking strong or Trump being protected. Christie was essentially bought off, just as Dr. Ben, I'm a victim, get me a new suit, Carson was bought off. This is the sort of chicanery that has been the hallmark of 2016. And I honestly believe that instead of being the election cycle in which corruption would be slayed like St. George with the dragon, we wind up with this being the most corrupt election cycle of betrayal. Because that is what 2016 turned out to be. That is how I think history will judge it. As a historian, that is how I judge it. But again, I could be mistaken, seeing as I'm living in the midst of it, with all of the strife and emotional turmoil that coincides and goes along with being in it. But there are those elements that are within it Now, Christie and Trump had clashed on a few occasions by early 2016, such as when Christie criticized Trump as an usurious candidate, but Trump said Christie was well aware of the Bridgegate scandal before it broke, and that, with the conviction of the two Christie staffers, had once again come to the foray right before the election. And so ultimately, those wounds ran deep, but they appeared to be healed when Christie had been appointed as the leader of Trump's presidential transition team. Yet recently, he has fallen out of favor with Trump yet again and has been replaced by Vice President-elect Mikey Wikey Pinsy Wincy as the leader of the transition team. And that was as early as last week, after Christie's involvement in the Bridgegate scandal once again made headlines. Folks, you cannot make this stuff up. You cannot deny that this stuff is there, clear as day, for anyone who is looking at this with a modicum of objectivity to see. And it's the same dire warnings that we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, have made repeatedly since we have been taking you over the friendly airwaves and leaving you with this indelible yet pure sense of enlightenment that we strive to provide you with each and every time. So how do we step back and take measure of what it is that we have encountered in 2016? How do we cut through the drivel? Well, as always, the Constitution is the litmus test. The Constitution is what guides us. The Constitution, being the supreme law of the land, is the only thing that should matter in these types of scenarios and situations. But that has not been what has come to the forefront. We see that Bannon and Priebus and Pinsy Wincy, all of them, have essentially embraced this populist strain that has reached accord with the American people. This accord of populism is dangerous and destructive. We must be cognizant of the danger that it does present, and we cannot, we must not, we shall not allow that to replace the Constitution. Because ultimately, populism is a thin veneer for progressivism and Fabianism. Now, that is something that before he turned coat, political radio pundit Mark Levin had said. But now that seems to be swept under the rug. Everybody's trying to come forth and proclaim that Trump is not going to be as bad as we say he is, yet the great weight of the evidence is completely contradictory to those reassurances. And so therefore, those of us who are paying attention cannot be reassured by them. I find no assurances in this drivel. What I do see, on the other hand, is something that weakens the nation, something that further drives a wedge between the American people, but particularly within the gutless opposition party, or GOP. And I have a feeling that come 2018, there will be a bloodbath. And it will not be a pretty sight. And so it brings me up to what one of the other Trump acolytes, little orphan Annie Yep Yep Coulter Toto, had been saying. She went to Twitter and was re-quoting one of Karl Rove's misnomenclatures or misstatements, in that it's 1928, that's the first time since 1928 that the Republicans have controlled all two, basically, branches of government. Not so much the Supreme Court, but they will have the control to the gates to that. But that's not true. We had it during 2002 and on, under the Bush administration, until 2006. So, no, it wasn't 1928, but there is some poignant thing about that. Remember that in 1928, it was Herbert Hoover, the alleged business outsider, the last president who said that he would not take a salary, as Trump has as president, who essentially proclaimed to be a conservative but was actually a frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftist, and had exacerbated the problems of the October crash, the Wall Street crash of October of 1929, by implementing those policies. And that ushered in FDR. FDR, who ran for an unprecedented 4 terms and served 3. He died while in office during the height of the Second World War, and was a frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist progressive, and it was a death nail for true conservatism of the Calvin Coolidge brand until 1964. And we haven't really had a president who was like Coolidge, not even Reagan, because Reagan had abandoned constitutionalism by his second term. That is something we can ill afford. We have got to get back to constitutionalism. We have got to start holding our leaders accountable for their words, deeds, and actions. And that means that we have to pay attention, and that we cannot just allow things to slide. And the sort of compromise that we see here, where it is actually compromising the sound foundation of our government, cannot be tolerated, because it places us in such a dangerous and precarious position. So again, how do I know that Trump will be one who does not follow the Constitution? Well, first and foremost, it's because by his own admission, he would not follow the Constitution. He said that he would continue the practice of executive fiat. And of course, we've already seen the bullying tactics. We've seen the push for a tyranny of false unity, in which the legislative branch is just essentially going to rubber stamp anything that Trump puts forth, and are going to abandon conservative positions. The Washington Post has put out a piece in which it says that conservative advocacy groups are going to be weakened under a Trump presidency. And guess what? That makes entire sense to me. Because of the past pattern of conduct exhibited by Trump, we know that he is going to rule however he sees fit, and he is not a man of restraint. And when the executive branch of government and the highest executive office is so far divorced and removed and distanced from what was originally intended by our founding fathers in their sagacity and infinite wisdom and foresight, we see that we need someone with restraint. But that's not Trump. Trump wants to have full control. Trump wants to be an autocrat. And Trump wants centralized control. And that's why, and we'll discuss this in much greater detail in our episode later tonight, he is already walking back his promises to repeal the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare. Because again, what did he think was the true purpose and auspice of government, the responsibility of government? Recall that he went out onto that town hall meeting back during the primary process and was asked by Jake Tapper. Well, not even by Jake Tapper. It was an audience member that had asked the question, and Trump, gave one of his usual rambling type responses that did not coincide with anything with the normal application of government as it is outlined, mandated, and defined within the 4 corners of the Constitution. No, again, he went forth and discussed the expansion of federal power. For him, it always is top-down. Top-down control is what he believes in, and of course that goes against the natural order of things. Recall that government begins with the family unit, according to the natural law. And the way that our founding fathers had originally designed and developed our nation to function was with the government being closest to the people, who are the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, having the greatest amount of authority. The state governments have what is known as near plenary or near absolute power to rule. They do not have to trace back to an enumerated power other than those that are constraining within the federal constitutions and the respective constitutions of the civil states. That is federalism. That is true federalism, but that is not what Donald Trump believes in. He believes in centralized control. We saw that with the way that he said that the federal lands in our westerlymost states should not be allowed to be held privately or by the states, that the federal government was the only one that had the wherewithal to make it great, as he said. And he believed that government should control education and healthcare. And one of the issues, one of the two main contention points throughout the 2016 primary process was Common Core education and the federal land issue because of what had been happening, and just federal abuse of power overall. But don't just take my word for it. I've actually got the clip, a video clip that I'm going to queue up of this town hall meeting where Trump provided that answer. And it can remove all, and it must remove all shadow of the doubt of what he was really pushing for. So here we go. I'm going to go ahead and cue that up now.
Robert Keitlinger. He's retired from the U.S. Army after serving in Iraq and Afghanistan. He's now a student at Marquette University, and he says he's undecided. Welcome. Robert?
Good evening, Mr. Trump. In your opinion, what are the top 3 functions of the United States government?
Say it again.
In your opinion, what are the top 3 functions of the United States government?
Well, the greatest function of all by far is security for our nation. I would also say healthcare. I would also say education. I mean, there are many, many things, but I would say the top 3 are security, security, security. We have to have security for our country so that we can continue to exist as a country. We are in danger. Thousands and thousands of people are infiltrating our country. We don't know who they are. There is a very vicious world. We're living in a very vicious world, and we're doing something that is against a lot of very smart people's wishes. I can tell you it's totally against my wishes.
So top 3, you're saying security?
Security. I would say, I say all top 3 are security, but healthcare, education would be probably 3. That would be top. And then you can go on from there. But the military and the secure country, so that we have a country, believe me, we've never been in a position, in my opinion, where our country is so vulnerable. Our military has been eaten away. When General Odierno left recently.
There you have it, folks. He did say education and health care. Now, where is that found in the Constitution? I can tell you, without any reservation, that it is found in Article 9, Section Existent, Clause 0, because that is not anywhere within the clear and concise language of our shared United States Constitution. That is part of the problem, folks. That is part of the reason why, when he says he's going to drain that swamp, I simply do not believe him. He has not once shown himself to be of the sort that would be willing to bring things back and willing to basically allow the federal government to have carte blanche and full control. It must be something that we consider. It must be something that we touch upon, because when we look at what he's doing, we see that he turns to other nations and says that they have the best sorts of things. He said that Norway had the best education system. Yeah, and it's just amazing. And I'm going to go ahead and bring up a video clip of that as well, because I think these things must come to the surface. They must be discussed because they are that important. So let's go ahead and get that queued up, and then we will discuss it in further detail. So here we go.
You know, in the school stuff, so out of the top 30 in the world, meaning 30 countries. We're number one in cost per pupil by far, right? Number one. So high that number two doesn't even exist. You have Norway, Denmark, Sweden, China. These are the best countries in terms of education, right? These are ranked the top 4 or 5. Great countries, great education.
Great countries, great education. China's communist. Norway and the Scandinavian countries are very, very socialist. Again, they are not who we want to emulate. And yes, it is atrocious what's going on in our system of education. But what he was getting at there was that these socialist nations are whom we must emulate. And again, socialism is completely contradictory to the supreme law of the land, which, pursuant to Article 6, Clause 2 of our shared United States Constitution, is none other than the United States Constitution itself. So we see that the things that he is saying are just, they're contradictory. It's why we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, have said for quite some time that the man is consistently inconsistent. He does not have any core values. His beliefs and what he thinks is best for the nation is mired in frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftist ideology. There's no way around that. It's who he is. It's what he believes in. It's what he is advocating for. And we can see that by the way that he's propped up Rents and Repeatus to be his chief of staff. So far from draining the swamp, he is just again stirring up the muck. And it's as we have warned. And the fact that people like Michael Weena Savage has come forth and put out a puff piece in Breitbart, or Trump Bart, in which he said that it was a mistake for Trump to place Priebus in a very high position within his regime. Well, Mike, duh, why didn't you pay attention to this? It's not as though his positions were secret, some stupid secret that you couldn't see. It was there, out in the open, for anyone who was looking at it with a modicum of objectivity to see. But that's right. None of the major Lion Branch Trumpidians, the priestly class of the Trumpidian tabernacle, were looking at this from an objective standpoint. They were being propagandists. They were pushing forth a narrative, come hell or high water, and they were moving to try and attack anyone who brought up these questions. And of course, Michael Weena Savage was one of the worst. The worst was Sean Hannity. Sean Hannity, who wanted to go out and blame Glenn Beck if there was a defeat. Well, I'm going to take that up an ante. I'm going to ratchet that up. Sean, if Donald J. Trump violates the Constitution, which he's already positioning himself in such a way that it would be beyond a shadow of the doubt that he would do that, I'm going to hold you personally responsible. It's your fault. And we will trumpet that from the hillside. We will not relent. We will not back down. We will not bow down to your Cheeto Jeebus. And again, it's not that we want him to fail. We don't. We are the new resistance, standing for the Constitution, doing what we should all be doing. That's part of the vetting process. I know that's difficult for a lot of these Lion Branch Trumpidians congregating in their Trumpidian tabernacles to understand, but it is the honest to God's truth. We are supposed to vet the candidates. That is our duty, obligation, and above all, responsibility in our capacity as the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing republic of ours. And so once again, the betrayal comes to the forefront. It is at the top. It has bubbled to the surface. It has percolated up to the top and is a disgusting thing to see. And of course, the blame game is going to be with us. I've already heard some say that, well, if you had just supported him more, he would have felt the pressure to do what people say. No, bovine excrement. And it reminds me of what Mark Levin had tried to do. Oh, well, you can't hold me accountable for the things that Trump says or the things that his surrogates say. No, I can't. You said you weren't endorsing him? Voting for him was the absolute endorsement. Please do not insult our intelligence. You see, self-responsibility, working in tandem with self-accountability to give us self-determination is what matters. That is what defines us as a nation and as a people. That's the entire reason that we have a system based on the natural law tenets, which are by their very nature immutable. But that's not what we're seeing from Trump. So don't expect the swamp to be drained. Expect him to serve that as drinking water and tell you to enjoy it. David Leach over there at the Strident Conservative has put out a piece in which he says that Trump and the GOP establishment betrayal has officially begun. Now, folks, this is something that we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, have been warning about, that Trump was not who he claimed to be, that the detente wing of the gutless opposition party, or GOP, was working to essentially do a coup de grace against true conservatives and constitutionalists. But as David French had put out in one of his National Review pieces the day after the election, it was that there is not a true mandate here for populism, that true conservatives who managed to win legislative seats or governorships, who were espousing the Constitution, had higher poll numbers and had performed better at the polls than Trump himself did. So if anything, the mandate rests with the Constitution, as it rightly should. But we know that the way that the Lion Branch Trumpidians, who are pushing for a tyranny of false unity, are going to try and portray this is to try and make it seem as though Trump had a landslide-style mandate, when he didn't. He didn't. But back to what Leach was saying. He had written an article about a week ago in which he said that a GOP-controlled Washington, from Donald Trump to Congress, needed to put up or shut up, meaning towards the campaign promises, those voluminous amounts of campaign promises that were made all throughout the 2016 election cycle. And unfortunately, even before Trump is sworn in, McConnell and the rest of them are preparing to do what the GOP always does: ignore the voters who put them in office as they take their positions of power. You see, it's that type of betrayal right there that led to the sort of raw emotionalism and outright venomous anger that was the hallmark of the 2016 election. People were bamboozled into thinking that they were selecting an outsider, when in fact Trump is the furthest thing from an outsider. He is the financial enabler of the rampant and rank corruption that has become the definition and epitome of American politics. And that's unfortunate, because it shows that the strains of danger run far deeper than we originally imagined. That it shows that we are in a precarious position, and that they are essentially going to try and force their line of thought down our throats against our will. And that's just not going to cut it. It's part of the reason why the Never Trump movement was so powerful. And yes, they try and say that the Never Trump movement was defeated. We may have lost a battle, but the ongoing conflict to preserve and promote our Constitution is never ending. You see, that's what they don't realize. They don't think of this in terms of immutable characteristics and aspects. They don't think of the timeless attributes of the natural law tenets that form the bedrock foundation of not only our shared United States Constitution, but indeed our very representative Republican form of government. And so they are going to try and walk it back, just as Trump has been trying to walk back the cornucopia of just outlandish campaign promises that he made. Now, the normal state of affairs and the normal course of what happens after an election cycle is that promises that were made can't be kept. But it has never been so stark as it is here. It has never been based on such extreme and radical promises as were lobbed by the orange hair magnet. And so that means that all of these alleged first-time voters or new voters or whatever the hell he brought in are going to be greatly disappointed. I think the ones who will ultimately come back and look at this once it is in the annals of history and say that they were betrayed the most will be the most ardent, vociferous acolytes and champions of Trump. People like Rush Limbaugh, people like Sean Hannity, people like Mark Levin, people like Michael Weiner Savage, who will eventually wake up to this, as Michael Savage has already started to, sort of. They are going to have to assume the mantle of blame that they so rightly deserve, because they are the ones that swept this under the rug. They are the ones that allowed him to get as far as he did. They, in conjunction with the rank and file of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the Salivating Mainstream Media, giving him 3 times as much air coverage as any of his opponents. And so that's one area where that idiot Michael Moore is kind of right. The media is partly to blame for this, but it's not just the media. There is more to it than that. There is a basic environment right now with prolonged higher unemployment and a sensation that the country is not on the right path that allows for a narcissistic charlatan to seize upon the reins of political power in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours. There's no way around that, folks, and it is only going to get worse. That is the problem that we're facing. And we see that they've already begun it, as Leach was showing. He went on to say that in the days following the election, Trump and his surrogates made several media appearances where they essentially confirmed that Trump will operate as the New York liberal that conservatives knew him to be. Just a few of the things that we've learned so far are that Trump is unlikely to fully repeal Obamacare, saying that there are parts of the disastrous plan he likes. During the campaign, if we recall, he had talked about how he would create a single-party payer system. So this isn't really that surprising. Thank you, Leach, that you saw this. That Trump also promised to fully repeal the Affordable Care Act leading up to the election when he was looking for ways to catch up to Hillary following the third presidential debate, again, saying whatever is necessary to garner votes, again, playing that political game. When everybody tried to say he was an outsider to politics and that he's not a politician, no, here is the proof, and it's in the pudding. He is a politician. He will say whatever he needs to benefit himself. It's what con artists and confidence men always do. And that, remember that when you say a con man, you're actually talking about a confidence man, a man who gains your confidence, tells you whatever you want to hear, and then fails to deliver upon it, leaving you out in the cold while he runs to the bank laughing the whole way. Well, that's what we've seen happen on the national stage of polity in these United States of America. We have seen a man who has been a charlatan for the vast majority of his adult life, a man who has engaged in seedy business practices, seize the reins of political power. We've also learned that Trump isn't going to rip up the Iranian nuclear deal. Recall that he said that that was one of the worst deals, botched deals in history, and that we must get rid of it. Now, again, his true frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftist colors come to the surface, painting him out to be exactly whom we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, predicted that he would be. This isn't rocket surgery. You don't need Dr. Ben, I'm a victim, get me a new suit Carson to figure this out. But that's not just it. It's also that Trump isn't going to relocate the U.S. embassy in Israel to Jerusalem without consensus from a group of people he has yet to identify. So again, what is he walking back here? What is he doing? It's all fluff. It was all a lie, a charade, political kabuki theater in order to lull the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in the United States, we the people, to a false sense of security. And remember what Benjamin Franklin had said. One of the most immortal quotes of Franklin's was that those who sacrifice essential liberties for a fleeting sense of security deserve neither liberty nor security, and shall surely have neither. Well, here we are. Here we are. We see that that is part of the lie that we accepted. And so this Jekyll and Hyde approach, consistently inconsistent to his job, is something even his campaign admits will be normal. For example, Trump's economic advisor, Anthony Scaramucci, prepared fiscal conservatives for the likelihood that the president-elect will abandon the economic policies he ran on. And I quote, Mr. Trump is a different type of leader, not burdened by rigid ideology. He is not dogmatic about policy positions. Rather, he has set bold targets from which to begin negotiations. In other words, it's the bamboozling of the art of the steal. It's what he wrote about in his book. It's what he has always been about. It is truly doubling down on these frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftist positions that he held before he ever assumed the mantle of even attempting to run for the highest office in the land. And so again, it shows that this election cycle is so appropriately named when we named it and deemed it the election cycle of betrayal. He has betrayed the American people. He has betrayed his voters. And he will betray us for 4 years. That's the problem. Again, it is why we say that you have to go back to the Constitution, that is going back to basics in this nation, and that is the only way that we can ever hope to place this nation back onto the path to prosperity. To restore prosperity in America, we have to realize what it is that fundamentally defines us, both as a nation and as a people, thereby allowing us to perform at peak performance. And that's just not what we're going to get under Trump. That was the dire warning that we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, trumpeted over and over and over and over again to the point of it being ad nauseum. But it was a truthful warning. A true and dire warning that needed to be taken into consideration. Because we see now that the mask is coming off, the charade is coming to an end, and he is just more of the same but worse. Because remember, he was worse than John McCain, he was worse than Mitt Romney's. He is a leftist. And even some of his support, dear friend of mine, admitted that he's not a conservative, but she went forth and said that doesn't mean he wouldn't govern as a conservative. Well, let's see. He's walking back his immigration policy. He's walking back his economic policy. He's walking back his commitment to repeal Obamacare. So let's see. Is that what a conservative would do when conservatives have been saying ever since that disastrous piece of a monstrosity of legislation was passed that they would repeal it? So governing as a conservative means you abandon that? That you ignore the Constitution? That you engage in this sort of chicanery that has basically further disenfranchised the American people and will further disenfranchise the American people? I don't think so. And that's the thing. They have projected their own self-value, their own self-identity, their own self-worth onto this man because they were so desperate, so lusting for victory, that they allowed themselves to be whipped up into a raw emotional state and thereby shut down their mental faculties and capabilities. They didn't think about it rationally, they didn't think about it logically, and this is the end result. But folks, this is only the beginning. It's not the end. It is not even the beginning. It is just the opening salvo that we are seeing here. And again, we see that it goes down even further. Going back to Leach's piece here, he says, do you remember Trump's clever drain the swamp promise? You know what we've been talking about here. Well, it would appear that the drain empties into the White House because many of the swamp monsters are either already working for him or they are being considered for a position. And that draws me back to one of the things that the Lion Branch Trumpidians had parroted all throughout the election cycle, and particularly in the primary process. When saying that we must bow down to this tyranny of false unity, it's that Trump would hire the best people, the bestliest of the bestly. Maybe they're bestial, but they are not the best. They are Fabians. They are the same type that have been orchestrating these plans against the supreme law of the land, our Constitution. And again, that will not lead to good governance. It never has, it never will. And the evidence is already mounting that this is going to be a continuation of the status quo, worsening our debt, furthering our destruction, and leaving us in an unsustainable, untenable situation. I wish it weren't the case. I would love for Trump to actually be a conservative. But there is nothing about the positions that he is assuming now. There is nothing about walking back the promises that he made simply to secure victory that would convince me that he is a conservative. He is the New York vulgarian. And that draws me back to, remember how everybody was so angry with Texas Senator Ted Cruz during the primary process when he lambasted Trump for his New York values? Well, here it is. It's front and center. And oh, by the way, Trump also said that we should just accept gay marriage as accepted law. See, you can make it not accepted law by having an agenda to have legislation walk it back, saying that no, pursuant to the 10th Amendment, we cannot tell states how to define marriage, that marriage is not defined in the Constitution, and therefore it is reserved to the states and the people respectively to define it and to have their laws. That is how our federalist system works. But again, as I mentioned in the previous segments, Trump is not about the true tenets of federalism. Trump believes in a centralized system. But when you go back to the foundational roots of this beloved nation of ours, you find that the main impetus of the rally cry of no taxation without representation was against the centralized king and parliament, or crown and parliament, of Great Britain. In other words, our founding fathers wanted the people to have their voice. That is what a federalist system does. The governments that get closest to the people, in which the people can exert the greatest amount of control, are the ones with the most power. The federal government, the central government, is supposed to be one that is limited to powers that are expressly enumerated to it by the Constitution. But we see from what Trump has been proposing here and the trajectory of the course that he has plotted out is going to be anything but that. He is going to further distance and divorce us from the Constitution, leading to even greater problems and even greater angst for the American people. There is no way around that, because it is who he is, it is what he plans, it is what he wants to do, and ultimately, we, the people, the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, are the ones that are going to suffer the brunt of this. We are going to be left holding the bag. But it still gets worse, because of those people, this goes right back to what I was covering in the first segment. Rinse and repeat us, the despicable rhino who hijacked the Republican National Convention in order to shut out conservatives has just been selected as Trump's chief of staff over the objections of conservative groups. While Trump did recently promote Mike Pence to chair his transition team, it is loaded with Washington insiders in addition to Trump's children and Wall Street executives. So here we are. The two-card Monte game, shuffling the cards around so that we lose each and every time, is in full swing. Its progress is there for anyone who is looking at this with any modicum of objectivity to see. It is both open and obvious. But will the Trump-vidians admit it? Some of them will. I mean, Bob Bennett's already starting to get angry, and he is a Trump-vidian. Michael Weiner Savage is already starting to show signs of buyer's remorse. Caveat emptor, buyer beware. Why weren't you? Why weren't you wary? Why didn't you at least acknowledge the questions about his fitness, the questions about his ability, the questions and lingering questions at that about whether he would follow the Constitution? Again, it's because they were caught up in this rapturous notion of, well, we're going to win, finally. But what good is victory when you sacrifice all that you stand for, those sacred principles that propelled this nation to such lofty heights in her relatively brief yet illustrious history? It is a hollow victory. And that's the way that the Never-Trumpers feel. And that's another reason why the Lion Branch Trump-vidians, as they congregate in their Trump-vidian tabernacle, are sitting there with such loathsome venom and hatred as they look upon the Never-Trump movement. They have achieved their victory, but they still want and seek vengeance. What does that say? What does it say about their leader? What does it say about the positions that they have advocated? What does it say about Trump? Nothing good. Truly nothing good will come of it, other than maybe we can have a breath of revitalization for true dyed-in-the-wool constitutional compositionists. It is time that we say no. Again, it comes back to, who is it that wields the reins of power truly in this country? We the people. We will petition the government for a redress of grievances. And there will surely be a long laundry list and litany of grievances under this Trump-talitarian type of regime. It's just one of those things that cannot and should not be ignored. But Leach went on over there at the Strident Conservative, saying that one of the longtime residents of the swamp, Mitch McConnell, will likely retain his majority leader position, so we can expect the same spinelessness we've come to know under his tutelage. For instance, he has already taken term limits off the table. One more reason we need an Article 5 Convention of States. Interesting that he put that in other words, to go forth and have it to where there is a convention to amend the Constitution to try and limit some of the power of the federal government as it has strayed from the clear and concise language that's already contained within the four corners of the Constitution. And while the Kentucky senator, he goes on to say, has indicated the Senate will do something about repealing Obamacare, one of his flunkies, Roger Wicker, a Republican of Mississippi, warned America to not to expect McConnell to suddenly grow a spine. And I quote, "Let's see if we can reach some sort of consensus with our Democrat friends to make this repeal and replace work." Now, that is one of the things that we are going to discuss in much greater detail during the program later this evening. That language, that bamboozling language of repeal and replace. That tells me that they are going to continue to try and control what constitutes about 1/6 of our national gross domestic product, or GDP. And whenever you try and control that at the central government level, which it was never originally intended to have that sort of power, you are going to see premiums skyrocket. You are going to see bureaucratic red tape take the foreground. You're going to see this nation continue to suffer, continue to flounder, and you are going to see the anger of the people ratchet up that much more. And to the Trump supporters, you cannot say that you haven't been warned. You have been. And we will not stop proclaiming these things. Because if we want this nation to ever return to the path of prosperity, if we ever wish to restore this nation to her rightful place, we are going to have to admit that, hey, there are consequences for our direct actions. That's what it means to be free. That's what it means to be self-accountable and self-responsible. Now, I know that that is not what many of the Trumpidians want to hear, but it is the honest to God's truth. It is that self-evident truth that cannot be escaped, but they are going to try and obfuscate. They are going to try and shuck and jive to shift blame away from where it rightfully belongs. And that's par for the course. Recall that one of the things that I've always mentioned with respect to the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftist is that they do not want to hold anyone accountable. That way they can sit there and proclaim that anything they do, you pass the buck on. And it reminds me again of that placard that Harry S. Truman had. And he was not that great of a president, but the placard spoke something to his character that is lacking in modern politics. It said, "The buck stops here." In other words, doesn't matter who under him, whom of his surrogates had gone forth and done these things, responsibility would lie with him, just as it will with Trump. Now, Trump is not going to acknowledge that. We've seen anytime anything goes wrong, he denies it. He'll lie. He will tell bald-faced lies in order to try and escape responsibility. But that is not the way that a federalist, constitutionally endowed representative republic like that we have here works. But it is going to require that we, the people, in our capacity as the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, come together and proactively maintain and safeguard our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. It means that we must hold these people accountable. And I know that that's far easier said than done, but it must be done because nobody else can do it. And so we will not back down from that. But on the other side of Capitol Hill, going back to David Leitch, he said that Paul Ryan's position as Speaker of the House is in danger after his lackluster support of Trump's campaign. Now that his buddy Rents is going to be Chief of Staff instead of Stephen Bannon, it becomes increasingly likely that Ryan will surrender what little remains of his conservative credentials as he surrenders to Trump's progressive goals. And Leitch went on to say that the day following the election, he challenged, he being Leitch, his readers to stop playing the game and start changing it. It looks like the only hope we'll have if we want to see our great republic return to her constitutional moorings is to go back to basics. That's right, folks. That is what it is going to take. It is going to take a concerted effort on our part, in our capacity as the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, to rein this rogue, tyrannical, and ultimately illegitimate government back to some modicum of control. And that is going to be a difficult task. There are going to be those who gnash their teeth and say, Trumply Dumply can do no wrong, and therefore you guys are unpatriotic, blah, 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 blah. Go to hell. To those voices, I simply say, go to hell. You do not get to redefine this nation. We are a republic, meaning that the sovereign citizens' rights as individuals are respected. This isn't some democracy. The first step towards addressing a problem is to admit that there is a problem, and there is a problem with Trump. The next step is to proactively use the tools that are at your disposal to place the nation back onto the path of prosperity, and you do that by returning to the Constitution. That is the message that we must demand. That is the position that must be accepted. Now, with that said, it is time for us to begin our descent. I'm going to go ahead and send the flight attendant back for one last round of alcohol. Ladies and gentlemen, we do not serve swamp water here at the Wright Flyer. We serve you alcohol. As always, I'm your captain, Randy Wright, and I want to thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer. Should you have any questions, comments, or concerns, or even topic suggestions, please feel free to leave them either here in the comment section at YouTube or on our Facebook page or our Google Plus page, or you can also tweet us with the Twitter handle of @RadioAviationEX. One more time, folks, that's @RadioAviationEX. And there you will find the departure board that lists my personal Twitter account, the personal Twitter account of my first officer, Jeremy Grapenton, our Blogspot account where we put up secondary links to the video feed as well as audio-only versions of our state-of-the-art radio program so that you can listen to these programs or watch these programs however you so choose and at your own leisure. And then you will also find the Cafe Press account, which I'm listing in the description here, which has all sorts of goods with our original logo on it, with our Uplifting America logos, there's 2 of them on it, or our First Class Passenger logo. And that's from shopping, it's got shopping bags, laptop tote bags, laptop covers and sleeves, phone covers and sleeves, mouse pads, you name it, we've got it at reasonable prices. With such a wide array of goods, you're sure to find something that meets your fancy and at a reasonable price. So go ahead and take a gander at that, folks. We really do appreciate the support. We hope to see you again next time. Please do take care.